Bonjour à toutes et à tous, David Barou, je suis rédacteur en chef aux Échos. Ravi de vous accueillir donc, pour cette journée de médias en scène. Ça sera en grande partie en français, quelques tables rondes en anglais, some round table in English, avec ici des débats qui seront peut-être un petit peu plus B2B, j'oserais dire, plus business, parler de l'impact des chocs et des crises sur les business models des entreprises, et peut-être un peu plus B2C, consumer, se tourner vers l'impact sur la démocratie, les citoyens et les auditeurs et les téléspectateurs et les lecteurs de différents médias chez nos amis de Radio France. Le programme est très chargé. Vous avez tous reçu un petit booklet ou leaflet, je ne sais pas comment on dit, qui donne le programme de toutes les conférences ici à Radio France. Ici, on va parler business model, choc, intelligence artificielle, la place de l'entreprise dans les médias, et puis beaucoup aussi de transition écologique et comment est-ce qu'on peut en parler dans les médias. Pour lancer les débats, on trouvait que c'était intéressant d'avoir une vision globale sur l'année écoulée et celle qui nous attend, sur les tendances et les chocs qui attendent le monde des médias. I'm going to switch to English now. Nic will be our first speaker of the day. He works at the Reuters Institute, which is based in Oxford, and covers actually the ecosystem of the media industry. And Nic, I'm going to give you the floor for a few minutes, and then a few slides, 15 minutes, to tell us about what are the main trends of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, it's really good to be here as part of the Médias en scène festival. So we run at the Reuters Institute, if you're not aware of it, a fellowship scheme. And I personally run a lot of the research that we do around changing audience behavior and around how technology is impacting the media industry. And what we see and what you see is very significant and disruptive changes that are affecting the news landscape right now. And I'm going to talk just really about 5 key trends today that we need to pay attention to in the next year. Using some of our data from our annual digital news report, which is based on an online survey of consumption in almost 50 countries now. So I'm going to talk about news fatigue. I'm going to talk about fears that the era of referral traffic from social media may be coming to an end, worries about trust, changing business models, and finally, the ways in which artificial intelligence and other new technologies may change the way we interact with the news this year. So the first big trend that we see is the decline in the attention for news, and in particular for traditional media. And this chart shows the decline in weekly reach for traditional media in France over time, especially, as you can see there, television and also print. So 20% fall in weekly reach for television, 31% for print. What's interesting is that online and social media are not really making up the gap, so they're broadly flat, and actually some declines in reach in the last year. And part of the reason for that is that when we look at people, the percentage of people who say they consume none of these sources in the last week, we can see that increasing from 1% in 2013 to 8% this year. So increasing numbers of people ignoring or turning away from the news, and we see this trend in many countries. It's a similar story when we look at the percentage of people who are interested in news. So this is the proportion who say they're interested or very interested in France. You can see it declined by 22% since 2015, and then the sharpest decline since COVID. So something seems to have happened since then, perhaps linked to this question of news fatigue. And we see a similar story in many other big countries in our survey. It's worth noting that the declines are a little slower in some Northern European countries, but the trends are still broadly similar and negative. Then linked to this, we have this idea of selective news avoidance. So these are people who are interested in news and they consume news regularly, but they also say they selectively avoid it sometimes or often. So we've been asking about this question for a few years, and we see about a third across all of our countries say they actively avoid at least some news. This is because people say they find the news depressing, they find it anxiety-inducing, particularly younger people. And many people, as in this example, are just looking for something positive. They're looking for hope, they're looking for agency. So I think one trend that we expect to see in 2024 is an increase in this notion of constructive or solutions journalism, journalism that doesn't just point out the problems, but gives people a sense of something they might be able to do about it on big issues like climate change, for example. Here are some examples from Die Zeit in Germany and from the BBC as well. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this trend and sort of really leaning into this idea of constructive journalism this year. The second big trend is linked to this question of lower interest or lower attention for news media. It's the very sharp declines that many publishers are seeing in their traffic from social media. This chart shows in particular how Facebook has become much less influential for news over the last few years. So this is aggregated data across 12 countries, including France. And what we're looking at here is the percentage who use each of these networks for news specifically. And you can see Facebook, 42% in 2016. That's come down to 28%. And this is partly Facebook themselves, pulling back from news. But at the same time, we have other platforms starting to compete and grow. And increasingly, these platforms are video platforms. So the growth for the last year has come from YouTube, it's come from TikTok, and it's come from Instagram. But these platforms, of course, work differently. It's not about posting something and getting referral traffic back. Often the publisher has to create bespoke content, and the consumption happens on the platforms itself. So it's a very different world we're moving into. We can really see the shift more clearly if we look at 18 to 24s. This is just looking at the youngest group in our survey and the networks they use for any purpose. So you can see this huge decline in Facebook with this group. It's almost halving. And at the same time, this rise of TikTok. And this change has really led Facebook to change many of their strategies to pull back from news and the support they've given to news, put that money into creators as a way of heading off the challenge from TikTok specifically. So what are publishers doing about this? Well, in 2024, we can expect them to invest a lot more in TikTok, a lot more in Instagram. This is a survey we did earlier this year, which shows this sort of change of publisher sentiment, if you like, with less effort going into those, what you might call legacy social networks like Twitter and Facebook. So I think this is a huge mindset change for many media companies. And what we have is publishers such as Le Monde, for example, hiring young creators or influencers to create content for TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts, aligning it to their mission of explaining the news to young people. In this case, this is a short video about King Charles in the United Kingdom.
Lui, c'est le nouveau roi du Canada, de l'Australie, de la Jamaïque, du Sri Lanka, de l'Inde, de l'Afrique du Sud, de l'Irlande. Bref, de tous les royaumes du Commonwealth. Mais c'est quoi ça? C'est une organisation qui réunit 56
So these are very different skills. It's a very different kind of media. It's fast, it's authentic, it's fun, and of course it uses vertical video that is native for these younger smartphone users. And I think part of the trend is also the way in which now news agencies are also really embracing, like AFP, are really embracing and supporting publishers with new products such as Social Stories, focusing on vertical video. So another trend for 2024. A third trend is whether and how we can restore trust in the news media. And that's been falling for many years for most, if not all, of our countries in the survey. If we take France as an example, we can see that trust has fallen overall by almost 10 percentage points in the last few years, from 38% to 30%. And you can see that a significant change happened in 2018, 2019 with the Gilets jaunes protests. And we see this in many countries where you have these sort of divisive debates about politics or about culture. And this is really beginning to impact trust because people see things in the media that they disagree with, that they don't like. And they often blame the media for that. So this is one of the reasons we've seen similar Similar trends with Gaza. If you look at a brand level, only regional newspapers have a trust level above 60% in France. So that's giving it a rating of 6 to 10. And the proportion that say they don't trust, so give it a rating of 0 to 4 for each of these brands, has increased substantially over the last 5 years. And this really suggests sort of rising polarization in society rather than anything that journalists themselves are doing. So I've alluded to this already, but one of the other factors, of course, in declining trust is the rising criticism of the media and of journalists that people see in social media, and it comes from all parts of society. And our research shows there's a really strong correlation, at least, between reported levels of criticism on the y-axis and lower levels of trust on the x-axis. And you can see there that France, the United States, United Kingdom, sort of right in the middle of that nexus of low trust and high media criticism. And then, of course, into the mix comes rising concern about the impact of artificial intelligence, of deep fake images. We've already seen the use of artificial intelligence in political campaigns, for example. It's a huge year for elections all around the world. So this was the Ron DeSantis campaign in the United States, where they used a mix of real images of Donald Trump and Anthony Fauci. Some of them are real, some of them are fabricated. So politicians increasingly are going to use this to further blur the lines between what is real and what is fake, potentially undermining trust further. So I think against this background, many news organizations in 2024 will recommit themselves to this impartiality or focusing on verification, building the skills to contextualize the information in real time. We've seen in Gaza how important that is. I think we can expect media companies to invest in also better marketing. You can see on the left-hand side there, the BBC has just launched a major marketing campaign trying to show how the journalism they do is better and different from the mass of information, the flood of information that you're going to have on the internet. But of course, we'll also see media companies trying to build trust with specific groups of people. So we also see the trend towards more partisan media, as well as the big companies trying to focus more on impartiality. So turning to the business of journalism, and 2023 has been a pretty bad year in terms of layoffs, in terms of closures. We've had BuzzFeed News, Vice filing for bankruptcy in the face of some of that falling social traffic that I talked about earlier, and also lower interest from advertisers. And then on top of that, the subscription boom, which we've seen in the last few years, seems to be slowing down. So as the cost of living bites. So this is an aggregated chart showing the percentage of people across 20 countries who pay for news in some form, whether it's subscription, membership, or donation. 17% on average, lower than that in France. So it's about 11% in France. And you can see that after the sort of the boom of coronavirus, this is really sort of slowing down. And in a number of countries, we see it's really a few high-quality brands that are taking the biggest slice of the subscription pie. So in France, Le Monde, Le Figaro, Les Echos, of course, and Mediapart. In the US, it's New York Times, according to our data, 36% of all of the subscriptions in the United States. But we also see a growth in niche. So the other thing that's working is smaller organizations with lower cost bases really providing value in a particular niche. So it's this combination of sort of big brands, really reaching those educated people who want additional valuable content, and then the niches. And then a few other trends I think are going to be really important in 2024. So what we're seeing is the use of games and other features to drive loyalty. So bundling together the news with other features. So in the US, 16% say this is a key reason to subscribe to a publication like the New York Times. We also see this trend towards individuals building up subscription businesses. So that might be Substack newsletters or podcasts. Part of that is also coming from donations. And then I think the big trend for 2024 is this idea of bundling, this idea of all-access subscriptions. You've seen how the New York Times are putting together a range of different verticals alongside news and selling the all-access subscription in Nordic countries. We also see this gaining traction, so putting together magazines, local, national, paid podcasts into single packages that reduces the friction for publishers. So finally, just to this trend of new technologies and formats driven by new devices, but also by advances in artificial intelligence. And I think one expectation for this year is we're increasingly going to be interacting with chatbots that can help us answer questions, but also do this in this really sort of different and conversational, natural way. So Perplexity AI is just one of the tools that allows you to ask those questions and then follow-up questions as well. And a very topical one here. So it's not just, providing you with the instant answer, but obviously what you're noticing here is that there's very little reference to the news brand itself here. So we're providing the answer directly. There are maybe some citations, but that is much different to how it is today with those blue links that refer traffic. So the fear is that artificial intelligence and search is going to reduce the impact and the value of brands in these incredibly important discovery mechanisms, such as search. And then I think we're going to see other ways of interacting with the internet emerge without the need for the smartphone. The smartphone, of course, will remain. It's going to be very important for many years to come. But in the future, you might want to ask questions to an AI pin or use augmented reality glasses, which are coming back into fashion. And again, these will summarize in many cases. They will reformat the news content, raising all these questions that we're going to discuss today, I'm sure, about intellectual property. So I think these are just a few of the sort of key trends that we need to think about in 2024. So firstly, how do we counter some of these issues of news avoidance and attention loss, negative news, polarized politics contributing to that low engagement? Some of it is wider societal pressures, but what can we do as journalists to give people more hope and to cover things in ways that are more constructive potentially? And then secondly, this idea of the end of the referral model, the rise of vertical video. This is not a natural playground for many traditional media companies. It's more personality driven. To what extent can we embrace this and also be true to our values? We have these challenges and changes in the business models. To what extent, if the subscription model is leveling off, do we need to think about different ways of getting audiences or getting more money from existing customers? And then finally, these new interfaces on the way, they're going to be hugely disruptive. We're not exactly sure how yet. But I think that we need to embrace it and lean into it and really understand the core dynamics and the changes they're going to have to the industry. So hopefully that is food for discussion and for the next discussion, David.
Thank you very much, Nic. Thank you.